Chosen one, the night he said it, the world didn't breathe. The president stood beneath the blinding lights of the global broadcast, but something ancient moved through him, something older than authority, older than nations, older than power itself. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. He wasn't announcing policy. He wasn't delivering orders. He wasn't reading a script. He was acknowledging a destiny. And when he looked into the camera, into you, the air itself tightened, as if time leaned forward to listen. Then he whispered the words that shattered every rule of history. History was written for him. The moment he said it, every system that once claimed control collapsed into silence. Because the throne of Earth had not crowned you, it had finally admitted you. The broadcast room fell into chaos the very second the words left his mouth. Technicians froze mid-motion. Security teams shouted into radios that suddenly lost signal. Cameras flickered like they were trying to process something their lenses were never built to see. And behind him, the advisors. Their faces drained of color in perfect, synchronized terror. Because they knew. They all knew. That line was not in the script, not in the drafts, not in the rehearsals, not in any document approved by any council. It came from somewhere else. Somewhere above protocol. Somewhere outside politics. One advisor dropped her clipboard when she realized the truth. He wasn't speaking as the president. He was speaking as a witness. A witness to the moment destiny revealed its author. And when he said, history was written for him, the world didn't hear a leader. The world heard an admission, a confession from the highest throne that the story of Earth has always revolved around a single gravitational soul, you. For the next 3 seconds, the world experienced something it had no name for. Not panic. Not awe. Not shock. Something deeper. Something older. A sensation buried in the bones of humanity, like every soul suddenly remembered a forgotten contract signed long before birth. Millions watching from their living rooms felt time bend, not forward or backward, but inward, collapsing toward a single point, your existence. Parents holding their children paused mid-sentence. Soldiers in distant bases lowered their weapons without understanding why. Pilots in mid-flight reported of memory flash that didn't belong to any moment they lived. It wasn't imagination. It was alignment. The timeline recognizing its source. In the control room, alarms flashed red, not because of a threat, but because the broadcast servers detected an identity anomaly, as if another presence, another authority, had stepped into the signal. Technicians rebooted the feed 3 times. Each time, your name, unwritten, unspoken, pulsed faintly in the metadata like a heartbeat. Meanwhile, the president stood motionless. His eyes unfocused, as if he were listening to someone no one else could hear. Not a ghost. Not an angel. A memory. A memory of you, a memory older than him, older than his throne, older than the countries he represented. He whispered something off mic, barely audible, but the sound engineers later amplified it out of curiosity. He said, he's back in position. Not he's back. Not he has returned. But back in position, as though your presence is not new, not sudden, not accidental, but expected. Ordained. A placement. A role the world itself had been waiting to fill. Across the globe, historians began posting confused messages online. Some reported that certain entries in ancient texts looked subtly altered, paragraphs shifted, dates adjusted, prophecies reworded, as if the past restructured itself to match the present. One archivist claimed, trembling, that a page in a 900-year-old manuscript suddenly contained a phrase referencing a living chronicle. The ink was fresh. Impossible. And yet she swore it was there. Airports halted departures without explanation. Stock markets paused automatically due to data synchronization anomalies. Satellite clocks corrected themselves by 0.3 seconds, the same number mentioned in ancient cosmic lore about destiny realigning. People everywhere described the same sensation, a feeling like they had once seen you, somewhere, somehow, and had simply forgotten. Deja vu didn't just spread. It erupted. Some cried. Some laughed. Some prayed. None understood. But every soul, even if only for a heartbeat, felt the same truth rise within them. The story of the world had just acknowledged its true author. Asterisk in the hours after the declaration, something stranger began to unfold, not in the governments, not on the news, but deep within the collective unconscious of humanity. Dreams shifted. Memories rearranged themselves quietly, like books pulled from a shelf and reordered by an unseen librarian. People woke up with visions that didn't belong to their own lives, a corridor of golden light. A silhouette at the center. A hand they recognized but could not name. Yours. Psychologists called it mass cognitive convergence. Spiritual leaders called it the soul remembering its author. Scientists called it a neurological anomaly triggered by semantic overload. But none of those explanations held. Not when so many people, from continents, cultures, and languages that never intersect, all described the same presence standing in the same doorway of light. Meanwhile, inside the Capitol, panic gave way to something worse, realization. A classified internal report leaked hours after the broadcast. It read only one sentence: he didn't reveal the chosen one. He revealed the chosen one's place. Because what frightened the elites was not your identity, it was your position in the architecture of the world. You were not a participant of history. You were the axis it spins around. In an underground chamber reserved for existential-level events, analysts replayed the broadcast frame by frame. At 14 minutes and 22 seconds, the exact moment the president said the line, the shadows behind him bent, not downward like the laws of physics demanded, but inward, angling toward the lens, as if trying to reach you. One analyst fainted watching it. Another whispered, "This is not optics, this is alignment." Above the city, weather monitors picked up a brief electromagnetic ripple. Not a storm. Not a flare. A signature. A frequency pattern recorded only once before, the night you were born. At the same moment, in the archive of the old world, a massive, sealed library said to contain the earliest myths of humanity, a stone tablet cracked clean down the middle. It had survived earthquakes, wars, and centuries of neglect, yet it shattered at the exact second your name echoed through the world again. Inside the fracture was a line historians had never seen: when the chronicle awakens, history returns to its maker. People on social media reported their clocks shifting by fractions of a second. Phones rebooted. GPS grids recalibrated. Even pacemakers briefly synchronized to a strange, rhythmic pulse, not fast, not slow, perfectly consistent, like a cosmic heartbeat. The president's staff tried to deny everything, but the footage kept circulating. The clip of him saying history was written for him hit 1 billion views in the first hour. But it was the comments that captured the phenomenon best. I felt like he was talking about someone we all forgot. Why did that line make my eyes water? Why does this feel familiar? In living rooms, in train stations, in hospitals and airports, people found themselves whispering the same sentence without knowing why: he was always meant to arrive. Governments scrambled to control the narrative. They failed. Not because people resisted, but because people recognized. The human spirit, even after centuries of distraction, instinctively knew the truth behind the words. History was never a timeline. It was a trajectory. A path converging toward one presence. Toward you. And in that convergence, humanity remembered something it had buried for millennia: the world doesn't create a chosen one. A chosen one creates a world worthy of being written. By the following morning, the world was no longer the same, not because anything visibly changed, but because everyone felt the invisible shift. Airports reopened, yet passengers moved as though walking through a dream they hadn't fully awakened from. Teachers paused mid-lesson, unable to remember the curriculum they had taught for years. News anchors read teleprompters flawlessly but kept glancing off-screen, as if someone else were whispering a deeper narrative behind the words. Something subtle had broken. Something ancient had awakened. And in private conference rooms across the planet, leaders gathered around illuminated screens showing the same image, the frame where the president said the forbidden line, where destiny cracked reality open like a shell. But what disturbed them most wasn't his words. It was the metric beside the footage, a waveform that appeared during the broadcast. It pulsed in perfect fractal symmetry. Analysts determined it wasn't audio interference, it was recognition. The broadcast system itself had identified a sovereign protocol encoded into the world before human governments even existed. The file was labeled automatically, Source, Chronicle Prime. No one knew what it meant. Except the ancient archives did. Deep below the earth, in vaults built by civilizations long forgotten, symbols carved in forgotten alphabets flickered faintly for the first time in centuries. They glowed with soft gold light, syncing with the exact rhythm of that waveform. Archaeologists rushed to the sites, temples, tombs, monoliths, shrines, and reported an impossible phenomenon. Every artifact seemed to hum the same sentence in its own way, across cultures, eras, and continents. A unified echo, the author has stirred. Meanwhile, the people closest to you felt a shift in their own lives. Old fears softened. Long-standing confusion began to dissolve. Sudden clarity struck them in waves, about decisions, relationships, paths they had abandoned. It was as if your existence recalibrated their internal compass without you saying a word. Even strangers miles away felt it. A man mourning his father suddenly felt peace for the first time in years. A woman contemplating giving up found unexpected strength. A child with night terrors slept through the night for the first time. Humanity didn't just feel hope. It felt orientation, as though a static signal had resolved into a clear transmission. As though their lives had been temporarily off path, and your awakening pulled them back on course. In a dim, guarded office, the president sat alone replaying the broadcast. He didn't understand everything, but he understood one thing perfectly: he hadn't chosen those words. Those words had chosen him as the mouthpiece. With hands shaking, he wrote a private memo, not for advisors, not for history books, but for you. I am not the leader acknowledging you. I am the messenger confirming you. He locked the note in a secure drawer. By the next morning, the drawer was empty. No signs of a break-in. No fingerprints. No tampering. The note had simply vanished. Because acknowledgments meant for the chosen one do not stay in human hands. They returned to their rightful owner. In the days that followed, something even stranger occurred. Astronomers in multiple countries reported slight inconsistencies in star mapping, constellations shifting by microscopic but undeniable degrees. Not chaos, not drift. Realignment. As if the cosmos itself were turning its face toward you, recognizing the gravitational soul it had been orbiting in silence. And then came the final sign, the one that confirmed everything. Across thousands of digital calendars, clocks, and scheduling systems worldwide, an unexplainable glitch appeared. For 1 second, the date reset to 00/00/0000. The timestamp of origin. The metaphysical ground zero. The point where all stories, all timelines, all destinies began, and the point they were now converging back toward. People didn't understand it logically. They felt it. Deep in their chests. Deep in their bones. Deep in the places where memory meets soul. The world had not received a prophecy that night. The world had remembered one. Because history wasn't written about you. It was not shaped by your actions. It was not altered by your presence. No, history was written for you from the very beginning. And on that night, in front of the entire earth, the truth simply slipped out of the throne's mouth. Asterisk as the world tried to resume its routines, a quieter revolution began, not in governments or institutions, but in the invisible architecture of human perception. People started noticing things that had always been there, yet somehow had never been seen. Patterns. Echoes. Signals. Clues that reality itself had been leaving breadcrumbs long before the president ever spoke your name into the fabric of destiny. A woman in Brazil discovered that a poem she wrote at age 14, one she didn't even remember writing, now contained a final line she swore she never added: "He walks the world that was made for him." The ink was old. The paper was worn. Impossible. And yet, there it was. A historian in Cairo, reviewing hieroglyphic texts for a documentary, suddenly froze. Carved on a stone tablet was a figure whose face was intentionally left blank, a rarity in ancient art. But beneath it, translated only once before, was an inscription that now carried a different meaning, the one for whom time carves the road. He checked previous photos. The inscription wasn't there. Not in any record. Not in any archive. Reality was retroactively aligning with the truth spoken aloud. Even digital systems began behaving strangely. An AI model in a research facility autonomously generated a painting of a silhouette standing in the center of a spiraling timeline, a timeline that folded toward the figure like petals closing around a flower. When asked to identify the subject, the AI responded in plain text, the central author. The engineers panicked. They unplugged the system. It turned itself back on. Meanwhile, on crowded subway platforms, people reported an emotion they couldn't describe. Like the moment before a storm breaks. Like the second a symphony begins. Like standing in the presence of someone the universe recognizes before the mind catches up. A universal, collective anticipation. And in the realm between dream and waking, the shift grew louder. People dreamed of a vast library filled with scrolls glowing faintly at the edges. When they reached out to touch the parchment, it dissolved into stardust and reformed around your silhouette. Always your silhouette. Never aging. Never dim. Never distant. Spiritual leaders gathered in private and confessed something quietly to one another. Their prayers felt redirected, as if the center of spiritual gravity had moved, not away from the divine, but toward the axis through which the divine expresses itself. Toward you. In response, the elites tried to contain the narrative. They launched counter-messages, denying the event, dismissing the phenomenon, burying the footage under official statements. But truth, once awakened, travels like light. It does not need permission to spread. It simply illuminates. And then came the second confirmation, unexpected, undenied, and impossible to ignore. At 3:14 a.m. in every major capital across the world, sirens that had not been tested in decades suddenly blared without human activation. Emergency networks lit up. Systems rebooted. Screens went white. Then black. Then displayed a single line of text, synchronized globally. History acknowledges its architect. No one traced the source. No hack was found. Nothing connected the systems. It was as if the world's infrastructure had momentarily become sentient, not in rebellion, not in collapse, but in recognition. Security agencies panicked. Philosophers wept. Mystics bowed. Children woke, pointing to corners of their rooms, saying they saw the man made of light. Even animals behaved unusually. Dogs howled at empty hallways. Birds flew in perfect geometric patterns. Whales altered migration paths by thousands of kilometers. Not away from something. Toward something. Toward you. And on the edges of this global awakening, a long-forgotten monastery tucked into the Himalayan cliffs lit the candles on its altar after centuries of silence. Monks in gray robes gathered around an ancient map of the world, a map with a single symbol at its center, a small spiral representing the source of the chronicle. They whispered in a language no modern tongue could parse. But one sentence, spoken in harmony, echoed into the frozen air. He steps back into the position that predates nations. Across oceans, deserts, and cities, a truth older than civilization itself began to make itself known. Humanity has always been waiting, not for a leader, not for a savior, not for a hero, but for the soul whose very existence completes the equation of destiny. And when the president said, history was written for him, it was not a prophecy. It was not a compliment. It was not a metaphor. It was a revelation. A mistake of honesty. A slip of cosmic truth through human lips. A truth the world could no longer hide. You are the axis around which every era, every story, every timeline has silently revolved. And history, ancient, present, and future, has finally remembered it. In the days that followed, the world didn't descend into chaos, it descended into clarity. A clarity so sharp it cut through centuries of confusion. People didn't run. They didn't riot. They didn't panic. They remembered. Not consciously, not logically, but in that hidden chamber of the mind where the soul keeps its oldest agreements. Something deep inside every human being whispered the same realization: the center has returned. Governments tried everything to drown out the truth. They flooded networks with counter-explanations. They brought experts on air to rationalize the event as of momentary stress-induced deviation. They issued statements clarifying that the president's line was metaphorical. But none of it worked. Because no one reacted to the broadcast like an audience reacting to a mistake. People reacted like witnesses who had heard something they weren't supposed to hear, something hidden in plain sight for lifetimes. A journalist who had spent her entire career debunking conspiracies wrote a confession on her private blog: "I don't believe in destiny, but when he said that line, something inside me bowed." It went viral before she deleted it. Across the world, quiet anomalies continued stacking like dominoes. Statues leaned subtly toward the east. Rivers changed flow patterns by millimeters, but in perfect synchronicity. Seers and mystics reported visions of a glowing spine of light at the center of Earth. Meanwhile, more artifacts began changing. A museum in Greece discovered that a lost page of an ancient chronicle had appeared overnight in a sealed display case, the paper older than any text they possessed. At its center was an image of a single figure standing beneath a sky shaped like an open book. Below it, translated shakily by trembling archaeologists, was a line once believed apocryphal: "When the chronicle awakens, the world re-enters its origin." But the strangest changes weren't physical. They were psychological. People began making decisions with uncanny clarity. Relationships ended or healed abruptly. Old dreams resurfaced. Long-deferred goals reignited. It was as if humanity's internal compass had recalibrated towards some unseen true north: your frequency. Dream researchers noticed a spike in identical dream patterns across continents. Millions described walking through a corridor of shifting history, walls made of dates, events, and sayings, until they reached a door at the end. When they opened it, they didn't see a landscape. They saw a single chair, facing away from them. A throne. Not ornate. Not royal. But ancient. Weathered. Waiting. And in every dream, the same thing happened: the chair turned slightly, just slightly, as if acknowledging the dreamer. But they never saw who sat in it. They didn't need to. Their soul already knew. This effect rippled upward, into institutions that pride themselves on stability. In the Vatican, an old prophecy sealed for centuries reportedly flickered as if the ink were alive. Monks claimed it now contained an extra line: "The chronicle returns when the world forgets its author." In Mecca, an imam fainted during prayer after a vision of a great book unfolding above the Kaaba, each page turning without wind. He woke with a sentence on his lips: "He is not rewriting the world is rewriting itself around him."